back to Anime on the Sea to Sky, episode 10, the end of my first series of podcasts that I've been trying to put out on this one episode per week schedule. We finally made it to December, so at least that's a little bit of a plus, but I'm honestly curious to see how the rest of it's going to go. In terms of news for the beginning of this week, it's not really prevalent to a lot of stuff. There is not really much that has been going through, considering that everything's just been kind of dialing down, getting into the last month of the year, and it's been a bit of a doozy, and we all just want it to be over, but to be fair, we've only got a couple more weeks to go, so at least we got that. A show that I really wanted to include in my upcoming list, it's just that Keep Your Hands Off Eizouken ended up being put in the New York Times for one of the 2020's best shows, and honestly, they can't be wrong. It's possibly my favorite of the year, in a year where there just wasn't really much choice to be had. Everything ended up getting moved to 2021, which is why the winter 2021 season is absolutely going to be nuts in terms of the amount of content and the amount of sequels and the amount of shows that are going to be popping up over the course of these next couple of weeks. But we still have to wait a bit, but honestly not too long, considering that Attack on Titan's first episode is going to be coming out in the next week or so, and that final season I really hope is going to be living up to its expectations. But beyond that, it's a shame that I wasn't able to put Eizouken up on my favorites lists for this decade in review sort of episode that I'm going to try to finish this series off with. But we're just going to have to wait and see. But honestly, if there's anything else that I can just say out of this article, it's just go watch Eizouken. If you are a fan of animation, if you're a fan of just the entire medium and how the inner workings go, whether you're one of creativity, whether you're one of animation and dynamicism, and regardless, it gives only a few tidbits on the production side, but most of it is just a character study based on which pieces of the puzzle that these three main girls fit into it and what anime creation is as a whole. But honestly, I just can't recommend it enough. Oh, look, there's another Spice and Wolf VR set that's going to be coming on to the Switch. Well, more than the Switch, you've got Oculus Rift, Oculus Go. Most of it is a VR sort of title, but the only thing that I can kind of attribute this to being news in my eyes is just I have the entire light novel set of Spice and Wolf on Bookwalker, and honestly, I've only gone through the first two light novels, and the only reason why I decided to jump into this series as a whole was because I don't know how many years ago it was, but the series itself finally concluded, and the two main characters end up having a kid, which was definitely going to be the ending that I kind of expected, but I was really curious to see how they ended up getting into it, considering that I was a fan of the 24 episodes of anime that we ended up getting, but it's just going to be one of those time and place sorts of deals where it's all sitting on my phone, it's all just waiting in the library, just ready to pounce on an opportunity when I have nothing else sitting around, which might not really happen for a while, but as long as it's there, I paid for it, so I might as well read it and give it an opportunity and kind of see how this story fleshes itself out and ends. But yeah, no, it'd be really interesting to see how that goes. And speaking of personal stories, so Cyber Agent CAA Animation and DMM Games have unveiled a mixed media project, Pride of Orange, the first girls ice hockey anime ever. Honestly, I'm pretty sure it's the first ice hockey anime, period. I would have to double check, but honestly, the only ice hockey related anime content that I've seen, not anime content, just inside the medium in general, was through a manga form. I know that there's a handful of ice hockey manga that have been going through in the early 2000s and 90s, but it's dude, it was just such a monkey's paw sort of deal because Crocs, or in this case Johnny, a buddy of mine, we were just kind of talking about it. It's yo, you have any have you ever jumped into fan fiction? It's only for a bit, and the only the only soiree that I've had jumping into that sort of medium myself, and the only thing that I wrote was the basis for a high school ice hockey a high school ice hockey anime with a Canadian Japanese kid going through and rising up through the ranks and possibly making it back to Canada. But it's just the only reason why I would make content for myself in that sort of way was because I didn't see any other content like it regardless. But like I said about the monkey's paw earlier, it's more, I have a feeling, going to be a cute girls doing ice hockey things. Because it looks like I'm pretty sure, was it 6 or was there 7? They've got a full line together. They've got a full line and a goalie at the minimum. So it's just kind of going to be one of those deals where I really have a feeling that it's not going to be like hockey, the anime. It's just going to be cute girls doing hockey things, which is kind of unfortunate. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if the majority of this, considering that's looking to be a slipshod production with somebody that's not incredibly notable, with a original project in the works, and it's just like I kind of feel like it's just going to be them going around and talking a bit about like the history of hockey and what makes them so interested. But as soon as they step on the ice, I can only imagine that the majority of this stuff is just going to be turned into CG. Considering that, I would imagine for a small studio like them, it would be incredibly easy, considering that once you get the girls in full ice hockey getup, all you need to do is just put like a cage over their face, and it would be incredibly easy to just CG implement their character designs and models into the show, just so they wouldn't have to put so much work once they actually step onto the ice. So that's just going to be, I don't know. It is the most bare bones, like trying to pander to whatever small hockey audience there is in Japan. But you know what? If this is all I'm going to get, then I might as well watch this once it comes out in either late 2021 or early 2022. Oh my god. No. I'm a sucker for hockey, dude. It's been a big part of my life for for the majority of the time that I've been here, and I don't know. It's once it finally comes out, I'll just jump into it and might as well give it a watch, because this might be the only hockey content that I'm ever going to have the opportunity to see, unfortunately. But I think for the final episode inside of this first season of series and this first season of podcasts, I thought I might as well, considering that it is the end of 2020, and although I am a year late, I would decide to do a little bit of a retrospect and a personal favorites lists of the shows that came out in the 2010s, so between 2010 and 2019. Considering that over the past 2 days, I've been going through this incredibly long Digibro-esque like monologue video where this dude made a near 5-hour long bloody top lists, basically the top 100 shows that came out in the 2010s, and he like watched or dropped every single one. It's like, oh well, that's going to give me a little bit of motivation to try and actually just get this through and see what I can make of it, and give everybody who's listening a couple of recommendations, and hopefully give a little bit of insight into what my preferences are and what my taste can be. But before I talk about television shows, I think I might as well jump into my 5 favorite films of the decade, just going through in no particular order, just basic recommendations to go through. And if we're going to be talking about basic recommendations, I guess I'll just go ahead and throw Your Name on top of that, considering that, hey, possibly my favorite animated film of all time. You've already heard about it. Just the most popular animated film that came out in the 2010s for a good reason. And honestly, I personally like it more for the way it increments its music and how it's included in the majority of the scenes that's played. Radwimps did an incredibly good job melding with Makoto Shinkai and making this film just an absolutely beautiful piece of work. But I would imagine I'm not the first and last person to say go and watch this movie, considering that it's already on around, thousands of times. But you know what? I'll just add myself onto the list. Just go watch it. I guess in terms of my favorite Miyazaki or Ghibli film to come out of the 2010s, I'll definitely give The Wind Rises that title. It was an incredibly good, detailed, and intrusive look inside one of Miyazaki's just passions, which in this case is just aviation and planes. And considering how that dream of his, when he was designing those as a child, as the main character in this movie does, and how that dream shifts, and how the dream can be morphed and shifted into different purposes, considering that he's allowed to make planes and design planes, but this is for wartime. This is something that it's always going to have a malicious purpose, and this is not the reason why he ever wanted to make it in the first place, but this is the only opportunity that he was given at the time. So unfortunately, that's all it goes through, but just the main 2 characters, just the couple inside of this, is just an amazing duo that drive the majority of the emotional beats inside of this story. But it's just incredibly fascinating, and to watch something like a passion project go through Miyazaki and what he is able to infuse into that work whenever that kind of pops by. I mean, there's a reason why Porco Rosso is my favorite film of his. I mean, without a doubt, it's just, how when passion essentially gets injected into a work, you can feel there's always something different. There's always something that's giving it that extra push and that extra mileage that makes it go above and beyond the majority of the films that somebody is able to make. And that's the biggest recommendation or just description I can give about this show, so go give it a watch. I have no idea how to describe this one. Penguin Highway. I had no expectations, no idea what I was going to be walking into this movie for, but it's just like one of the most quirky and weird but entertaining films that I probably watched in this entire decade, considering that most of this just follows, I'm pretty sure, like a young boy who's around 10 or 11, and he's like, not genius is a strong word, but he is incredibly intellectually gifted at the point where he treats everything like an experiment. And when, penguins start jumping up and around his hometown, and he's just going around with all of his friends trying to figure out what essentially the cause of it is, and goes through where he meets this older woman who works as a receptionist at a dentist that he has to go through, and the both of them become an unlikely duo trying to figure out the mysteries around why the penguins are shifting and bringing themselves into their world. And there's not really many other ways that I can imagine to describe or recommend this show. It's just that, I don't know, the production is honestly outstanding. The story doesn't moves at a perfect pace. It's not breakneck. It allows the quiet moments to breathe, and as the movie goes on and the themes that it allows you to experience by the end of it is honestly something that was incredibly unique over the past couple of years, and I can't give it big enough of a recommendation. The most recent film on this list that I ended up watching twice. One in both the sub and the dub would undoubtedly go to Promare. It just triggers, not really magnum opus, but it is the most trigger movie by far, just incorporating all of the quirks and unique little flourishes that the directors of that came from Gainax, and all of the content that they've been creating over the past decade, and what has become before them, and what it's going to be leading into now, especially with how they were able to incorporate the CG elements and fire into this movie, was absolutely flawless. There was just little to no downtime. All the action was just on point. Some of the slower points didn't really have enough time to just get developed and move along, but essentially Leo and Gallo just do an incredible job just carrying the entirety of this film, even though all the side characters are just quirky enough in their own right, not really getting a lot of time to be developed, but there's not really much of a reason to, because you know exactly what you're going into this movie for. You know it is basically just Trigger doing what they do best and bringing the absolute insanity to the screen in every which way and form. The soundtrack was absolutely fantastic to jive and jump around to. I would imagine there were a handful of people that were kind of annoyed when people would start singing this in the theater, but that's honestly, which I would probably get a little tilted, but it was probably like one of the best theater experiences I had in the decade, considering that it was just so hype and everybody knew exactly what they were getting into as soon as they walked into that theater. And I mean, it's the only movie on this list that I ended up going back, I watched this in theaters twice, once in sub and once in dubbed, and the dubbed was also just a fantastic rendition and a really good adaptation, which probably one of the reasons why I ended up jumping into it was because I wanted to pay attention more to the visuals, and I didn't have to read because there's just so much happening on the screen all at once, and the fact that I only had to listen to the characters and just take in everything that was happening was honestly just as good of an experience as I had the first time. But I don't know, the dub was really solid and really did a good job trying, not really replicating, but putting their own spin on the characters as well, and they fit each of their own respective roles to a T. So that's definitely one of my favorite experiences, film experiences over the past decade. Although second to Your Name in terms of my just below for my favorite film of the 2010s would definitely be Night is Short, Walk On Girl. And as much as I would like to say it's mostly just a sequel to Tatami Galaxy, not really. It is definitely its own thing, just following, which I'm pretty sure her name is just Atome. Like, her and the main dude don't end up getting names. They just are characters involved in this world on one crazy night going around Kyoto that involves drinking. It involves incredibly old pornographic material being sold in the underground. It involves a drinking contest going between an old man and the passions of youth being put head to head in a duel of perspectives. It goes through, there's a college university play that is happening in the middle of all this, where the student council is trying to shut them down at every turn, but they seem to be having an edge. Like, there's just so much jam-packed and so much fun and kineticism inside of this film that there's just nothing else that is quite like it inside this decade. And if there's any, I guess I don't have to recommend Masaaki Yuasa's previous works. Like, I mean, you don't have to watch Tatami Galaxy, the series, in order to go and watch this to have a good time. But the fact, like, how he incorporates references to all of his previous material and all of his works all into this one piece is just, it was so nice to just have all of those callbacks just being added on to just add to the experience. So it was an incredibly fun time, probably my second favorite film of the decade, only second to your name, and I would definitely give that a more wholehearted recommendation. Okay, so I guess if I'm going to be trying to get this done in a a quick enough manner. So I'll go through a quick handful of honorable mentions before I get to the top 20 series that I have for the 2010s, and all of these are in no particular order, and I mean, for their own honorable mentions, sure, I'll just get to those now before I just keep on going randomly. So it's weird because Fate Zero, Steins Gate, and Tatami Galaxy all fall under the same category of, these would all have probably made the list if I had, like, rewatched them recently, because I mean, I watched all of these shows, Steins Gate and Fate Zero, probably back in 2012, and Tatami Galaxy in 2013, and it has been a long while since I've rewatched them, and I know that the quality is there, but it's just a lot of the just the specific details and how everything pulls out in those shows. I know that it's a good watch, and I know that at some point in time, if I ever decide to jump back into those stories, I will have a good time, but it's just, I don't have enough to go off of with them in order to, like, confidently put them on that list. So that's kind of unfortunate, but those are all good recommendations. Fate Zero being a fantastic prequel to the Fate series with an entirely different tone and an entirely different writer to give a good new spin and a new take on the series that hadn't necessarily been done before. If you had seen any of Fate Stay Night or Unlimited Blade Works, you already know how the story ends, but regardless of that, it's a more than good enough ride to bring anybody else into the Fate franchise, honestly. Tatami Galaxy, like I said before, is just written by the same dude who did Night Shore Walk On Girl. It includes the characters. It has a lot of callbacks. All the callbacks from Night is Short essentially owe it to this film, or this series in particular, which is essentially just about a dude in university already going through 2 years of his life inside of it, and he's already halfway there, and he feels as like he hasn't accomplished anything, and I'm already just splitting it off and rambling into the abyss. But honestly, from all that I can recall, especially it having possibly one of the best anime endings of all time, like just being able to tie everything up together so nicely, considering that the show just follows him in his last 2 years of university, and he goes into different clubs, into different scenarios, into different events and activities that defines the last few years of his university life. But it time loops at the end of every episode, and so he tries this, and then he tries this, and then he tries this, and somehow it's all able to coalesce into, like, possibly one of my favorite episodes of anime, period, in the final episode, and kind of just give this message of essentially, even though I wasn't able to take it to heart, I watched this in my first year of uni, and the messages definitely didn't stick because I was just a fucking idiot, but it's just, it's a definite positive outlook on how you can actually let these experiences define you, and it's definitely a good recommendation to go through. I think I would definitely put Steins Gate on this honorable mentions as well. I mean, Nick, a buddy of mine, I'm pretty sure it's one of his favorite series and still is, but it's like, man, after going through, like, I haven't rewatched it in 8 years. Not a lot of people liked Steins Gate Zero, but that doesn't necessarily dip on the show's quality here. So I'm gonna have to go back and give it a rewatch to actually, like, confirm my feelings on it. But afterwards, I'm pretty sure it was in my top 20 before I made this list several years ago. but we're just going to have to wait and see how that goes. Sound Euphonium, also an honorable mention, goes through on just the quality of its production alone. All the characters are interesting. The potential relationship that would have been able, that I hoped would have blossomed by the end of the first season was like one of the best bids in terms of like also one of my favorite episodes of anime, leading through the festival arc. But yeah, the second season I definitely would give a lot of props considering that I was definitely invested through the competitions that they were going to go through, and it's honestly one of Kyoto Animation's best works by far. You're going to be seeing a couple of those moving on, but just you'll just have to wait and see on that. But I think the last one, even though it's only had 2 seasons to its name, and the second season came out in 2020, Kaguya Wants to Be Confessed To definitely is one of the best comedies I have seen in anime, period. I mean, I was an incredibly huge fan of the manga before the first season came out, but the fact that the director, who was the same director on a show that's also on my top 20 list, who's notably known for drama, decides to come into a romantic comedy and infuse just so many of his quirks and his unique style to make all of the panels inside of the manga just pop in its own distinct way, but he has a really good example of staging and letting the situation play out. And of course, the addition of sound, especially with the 2 main voice actors for Shirogane and Kaguya, definitely just deserve A's. Like, not only A's, just S pluses in my book, considering that they bring the characters to life so much more than I thought they would have been able to, just coming off of the page. And it's considering that I wouldn't be surprised the 3rd season is going to be announced by the end of 2021, it is definitely a show that you need to go through if you're at all a fan of decent rom-coms. So, finally jumping to this list I guess I just wanted to do something a little more grandiose and give a top list at some point in time. So I might as well do this for the end of the season. So, I mean, at least at this point, all of these shows for the best of the 2010s are going to go with very minute graces, basically from the 2010s, all the 2010s, 2010 to 2019. Considering that even though it's been a year since that decade has ended and there hasn't really been much to look forward to for this year, I was thinking about just looking back and kind of seeing how the majority of that decade kind of molded and shaped my view as an anime fan, considering that I did get into anime back around the beginning of 2011. And so it was just about this decade that I started along this path of enjoying this medium, and I couldn't be more thankful for it. But to begin, this show was probably the most recent one that I ended up watching, considering that I had a lot of time during quarantine and a good amount of time to catch up on it, would be Hunter x Hunter, the 2011 adaptation, because it is possibly the best shonen I have ever watched with the amount of episodes that they were able to go through. I know that the manga is just mostly on hiatus, like given the Berserk treatment, and it's just off and on, and there's not really much that they can do about it considering Togashi's health. But just the way it's able to, like, the breadth and depth of this world, along with the power system, the story, the characters that you follow through the beginning, through the Hunter exams, through York New, through the Mafia, and through the Chimera Ant arc that essentially ends off on the series with, like, some of the best best characters of a main cast that I've seen, like, for shonen. Like, I mean, Gon is just one of the most unique shonen protagonists inside the bunch, but he's still able to change to such a degree due to his power and due to the friendships that he makes along the way, that it just makes for one of the most unique but driving experiences inside of a shonen that I've seen. His friendship with Killua, who's trying to distance himself from his family of assassins and try to, like, make a stake for himself in the world. And just the two that Kamagai, Leorio, and Kurapika, that each have their own motivation and drives, just give more than enough depth to this main cast to stretch out for an entire lifetime of this story. And so it's kind of unfortunate that the story in of itself is not completed and most likely never will. But, I mean, the final episode of the series gives enough of a send-off that it makes more than enough due for the characters that we were able to enjoy. And honestly, it is once the fights get going, it's a fantastic bid with a mix of brawn and strength and skill and tacticianing, not really the best bid, but strategy. It's a fantastic example of what shonen is capable of, and possibly one of the best ones out there. Another one that would go, so moving next up onto the list, Yuri on Ice. It's been a while, and even though it's only been since 2016, it definitely gives off that it's been several years, more years than I would think. But what the series was able to accomplish, like not only being a showcase in animation, for the most part, the fact that it was able to incorporate or mold itself into the real sect of figure skating as well, considering that we just in this show follow a Japanese figure skater who's been just tailing off towards the end of his career, but he ends up finding a second wind once he actually is able to take tutelage under his favorite skater and learn from him and potentially try and make himself back into a decent section of his competition. So not only bringing himself up, but comparing himself to the old guard, slowly but surely, like bringing himself into those ranks, and also going up against the new guard as well in the form of Yurio, who is also just a bundle of chaotic energy. And I just remember having so many good memories about this series and just seeing how many real-life influences it takes and how many real-life figure skaters actually, like, jumped into it. And, like, the breadth of how many facets that this show was able to go through definitely helps. Thankful to the incorporation of social media, not only in the series itself, but how it was able to spread around the internet and just kind of get a lot of help from the figure skating community as a whole. There was also, I'm pretty sure I remember there was an Instagram account called Naughty the Fuck, and it was one teenage girl who is like reacting with such extreme vigor and thirst to all the characters and what essentially was going on inside. Like, I was waiting for those stories just as much as I was waiting for the next episode to come out. So I just had a lot of positive experiences with this series once it came out. I would definitely give it a good recommendation. There's going to be a sequel film coming out sometime in 2021 or 22, and I honestly can't wait to see what's able to become of that, because it's been a long time coming. Moving on to another not really directorial show, it's just a really good and enticing drama done by the same director as I said before, Kaguya Wants to Be Confessed To, and this is Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju. And it is a period piece that stretches upon a good chunk of the 90s and into the 2000s for a Japanese cultural style of theater called Rakugo, which was just, you could not really give a decent, or not really decent, an enticing synopsis of the series, because it's literally, oh yeah, so what is it about? Oh, well, it's about Rakugo, and it's this, sit-down play where the actors, it's only one actor, and they have a fan as their only prop, and they have to do this rigmarole of different stories and perform it. And so it focuses on, part of it focuses on a guy who used to work for the Yakuza, and then he gets out of prison, and he uses Rakugo to take a reformation in his life and turn it around. But the majority of the first season focuses on his teacher, who was a Rakugo performer leading through I'm pretty sure it was World War II, was one of the bids, and how he's able to try and keep this culture and this old style of art alive as it gets brought into the future, and as him and his friend go through trials and tribulations to try and make sure they can live off of Rakugo and try to make this art take the art to its extremes, as well as essentially keep it alive once more and more diverse forms of entertainment start popping up in Japan, and how they're able to keep that sort of in the public consciousness and not let it die out. But it's just, there's not really much that I can do to do the show justice. It's a fantastic drama, great romance, great relationships, character dynamics, everything I look for, considering that when I look at a series, if it's a drama, I hope that the characters and the relationships are able to pull as much out of that scenario as they could. In terms of Kaguya, I definitely put that up on a pedestal, considering that if you're a comedy show, you need to create some of the best and funniest scenarios, but not only just go it off page for page. Do what the director for this did, and essentially use every modem of tools at your disposal, considering that not only is it an anime, in that case you have to use the comedicism of the voice actors and actresses that are going through. You have to pull the camera, you have to direct the scene, you have to bring color and sound and edits into it to bring out as much of its potential. And the director of this definitely did a good job on both those shows. Both of them get a recommendation from me. Please go and watch it. So moving along, told you this wasn't going to, or Hibike wasn't going to be the last Kyoto Animation work on here. Hyoka. I would still say this is their best work. For take that as you will, it is probably their best television anime adaptation in terms of just the breadth of the characters, the mysteries that they're able to incorporate into the show, and how that changes the character dynamics. But not only does that, but bring them closer together. One of the most, if not the most consistently good animated production for an anime series, like in a long fucking time. Possibly one of the best of the 2010s. For the 22 episode run that they had, they just did a smorgasbord and a clinic on what you were able to accomplish with good directing, pieces of sound design, just color shading, animation, dynamicism, just like tens across the board. It was really fun on rewatch, and I think it definitely like stuck in my top 20, considering that I watched it when it was airing back in 2012, and then gave it a rewatch in 2015, and then gave it another rewatch in 2018. It's like, oh, so after getting into the anime sphere in of itself, like you would think now that I've seen more, rom-coms or mysteries based in the high school, that this would drop in quality. It's like, no, this is better. This is probably one of the best high school anime adaptations that you were ever going to get inside the medium. But just, I guess, moving on from the details about it, it was more, so it's based on Oreki Hodoro, who ends up becoming a first year at this high school, and him and his friend Satoshi end up revitalizing the basic literature club at the, not the expense, at the plead of one of the girls that have essentially been holding it together, Chitanda, who is very, enrapturing to Hodoro. Like, he just takes up on it immediately, even though he's a guy who really wants to just keep his energy conservation low, which in this case, the most bare bones and laziest way to say that he is lazy as fuck. But I would definitely give this one a good recommendation, in the sense that it's probably one of, it is still the best, I think, TV animated production that Kyoto Animation has been able to go through and create. And I don't know. There's not really much to say. It's kind of the same deal as Rakugo, where there's not really a good way to get people enticed about this show, where it's like, oh, so 4 high school students just fuck around inside of a classroom and do, odd jobs and solve mysteries, but very small mysteries, not essentially ones that would, bring too much conflict into the table. But it's just, as a character drama in of its own, with a little bit of romance thrown in there, it's honestly at the top of its class, and there's not really much else I can say about it. Leading into another one, kind of the same deal. I don't know why I put all of these guys in a row. Chihaya Furu, kind of the same deal. Don Kwan has tried and tried, because I know it's his favorite show, and and once again, it is such a turnoff. It's like, so what's this about? Well, it's a sports anime, but it's on this very niche Japanese cultural card game called Karuta, where there are 100 cards from 100 poems, and 50 poems are played on the board, 25 on each side, and you have to slap away the card once you hear the speaker read out the first verse of the poem, and you have to respond with the second verse. And the one who ends up with 0 cards at the end wins. There's not really much that you can do to accurately describe the show. It's not going to get anybody invested. It's not going to get anybody enticed, which is incredibly unfortunate, because it is a fantastic drama. It is a fantastic romance, I guess, considering that it's one of the parts that still comes up every now and again. But I'm thinking, man, just get away from this romance. Just bring me back to the Karuta. Bring me back to the sports dynamicism, and get me back to the action. I would definitely go and, same deal. Really good aesthetic and design, kind of similar to Hyoka, incredibly colorful, incredibly dynamic. There's just a lot of good notes, and all the characters are extremely lovable. It's kind of the same deal, whereas through Hyoka, they have to bring in enough members for a club. The two of the main characters, Chihaya and Taichi, they have to get enough members to make a Karuta club at their school, just so they can get enough funding and get a place to actually stay and practice. And Arata also gets thrown in, because he was the one that ended up getting both of them into Karuta in the first place, but he's on the other side of the country in his own prefecture and trying to become the master, or the Meijin in this case, where you have to be the best, be the best that no one ever was. And it's incredibly interesting to see how these characters just keep going and what conflicts they have to face, not only in their own card games, but in the relationships that they have to bring as well. And in terms of the love triangle, I'm definitely going to be a Taichi gang. You really can't bring me away from this, considering that him and which really sucks at the moment, considering that we are left off of a cliffhanger at the end of season 3, and we know that there has to be another series or two because it isn't completed. But even though that's a little bit of a knock on me for not being a complete story, I just, based on how hyped season 3 was that came out recently this year, it's just one of, if not the, just one of the best sports anime, I guess, to just put it plainly. So I'd definitely give that a recommendation. Moving on to something that's a little more easier to sell, and one that, of course, is going to have its final season popping up I think in the next week, it's going to be Attack on Titan. So I watched this when it was airing back in 2013 and didn't really think much of it. You would probably, at the time, call it like the Game of Thrones of anime, considering that everybody else was dying off left and right, and it was incredibly dark and grimaced, and all the characters have to rely on each other in through this dark time and this like weird dark fantasy sort of scenario where humanity has been all but extinct, and they live in protection behind these walls, and they've been doing so for the past 100 years, and the only thing that at the moment is keeping them inside are these massive, I think it's like 2 meter to 15 meter tall man-eating titans that essentially just keep humanity at bay. And it's incredibly easy to get somebody into this, as well as it being on every single streaming platform imaginable. But the third season in particular that came out in 2019 was, without a doubt, the season that just like brought me into a whole new world. Like the revelations and the battles and everything that you end up learning and taking place in between those seasons. I will admit I was spoiled on a lot of the reveals that happened in season 2 for methods entirely within my control. I was an idiot. But not knowing anything going into season 3, and especially the final season 4 popping up, it's an incredibly like high octane and just wild and diverse ride. If you were going to recommend anybody to get into anime, this would definitely be the show that I would be going through if they're looking for a lot of good fun and a lot of action and a lot of intrigue. Going to the opposite side of that spectrum, another recent one that came out over the last 2 years would be A Place Further Than the Universe. Simple enough. It's about a handful of girls following one's lead to take a trip over to Antarctica to possibly get some closure and find out the results of one of the girls' mothers, Shirase, considering that her mother went missing. Based on, I don't know if this was based on a novel or not. The novel that they bring the title on is called A Place Further Than the Universe, which talks about Antarctica, and that's where all the girls essentially like go through for various reasons. And honestly, it was fun. It was incredibly fun, just seeing all the journeys that all of them go through and the trials that they have to achieve like with one another, and it was incredibly entertaining and fun in that regard. Each of them have their own quirks that make them not only memorable but just fun to watch as well. The only knock that I can kind of give this show is that it tries too hard to get a cathartic moment at the end of every episode, and if you're doing this for, which I think was 13 episodes long, it definitely didn't need that many in order to be, it's like, yeah, I don't have to be afraid anymore, or I can trust in the sanctity of my friend. Like, you didn't have to make some grandiose statement at the end of every episode. If you did it like once every 3 or once every 4 and spread them out, honestly, that would have done the show a lot of favors. But when the moments hit, they hit hard. Especially within the last 2, once the story concludes and we're just getting to the end of the long journey that they were able to finally achieve through others' compassion and determination. It was more than enough of a good ride, and definitely one of my favorites of the decade. I guess moving on to something else that's also going to recently finish up, not in this decade, but the decade next. Fruits Basket. It's 2 seasons in. There's only 13 episodes, I think, left, which are going to come out within the next 18 months, and I still think it's just my favorite shoujo of all time, no question. I didn't read the manga. I didn't watch the original, I think it was 2006, around 2006, anime adaptation, considering that I just took one look at the character designs and was like, yo, this is not it. So even though I was a big fan of shoujo, I didn't necessarily give it the opportunity, and then I can't remember if it was 17, around 2017 when the first season came out. It was like, oh, so this is why people are touting it as an incredibly like well-written piece of work and possibly one of the best shoujos of all time, considering that the vast majority of the characters, even though they have a wide cast to work from, the main ones definitely do their work and follow Toru and give Toru the strength that she needs. But I mean, so shoujo kind of reverse harem, I guess. Not really reverse harem, most of it's just a love triangle, I guess, in this case. But we have Honda, not Chitaru, I can't remember her last bloody name, but Honda is a high school student, and she's homeless because both of her parents are dead, and her grandfather is currently in the middle of doing renovations on his house, which is where she used to live, but she ends up getting taken in by the Somas, who are this rich traditional family, but the twist is that anytime one of the... Yeah, but they are cursed in a weird way. Anytime any of the Somas interact with the opposite sex, it's essentially just like... I guess embrace, because they've held hands, they've like done a lot of just basic skinship, but if they embrace or hug one of the opposite sex, they turn into one of the 12 Chinese zodiacs. And then in this case, one of the dudes of the main triangle is the one hanging outside of the Chinese zodiac, which was the cat. And they do an incredibly good job like melding this. So Kyo and Yuki are essentially like the two main love interests inside this love triangle, and they both do an incredibly good job getting over trying, or at least, and succeeding more often than not, now that we're getting to the end of it, of absolving their trauma, considering that trauma and horrible familial relationships are essentially the backbone of a lot of the drama and the basis that a lot of this story rides on. But it does it with such apt finesse and just gentle embrace and understanding that it's definitely something that you can't help but get teary-eyed over. So I can't wait until the series finally concludes, and I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if this would be one of my favorite shows of all time if the ending is able to stick the landing. So we'll just have to wait and see. March Comes Like a Lion, coming up next on the list. Yeah, no, it's just, once again, an incredibly well thought out drama about a boy who lost his family in a car crash very early on in his life, and the only thing that he was able... Ray, that's who it was, Ray. And the only thing that he has to cling to is shogi, which is just this Japanese version of chess, and considering how well or how good he was at it, on top of the fact that his foster father inside of his family was a shogi teacher, champion, essentially all the way up the ranks, who gave more attention to him than his own two children, which ends up creating a rift between the lot of them, and he ends up moving out very early on, or as quickly as he could once he started making money off of winning shogi tournaments. And so he's just this 17 into 18-year-old kid living on his own, but what gives the show its light and its life is the Kawamoto sisters, who is this other surrogate family that he ends up spending a lot of time with. These three sisters who also had family complications of their own, who live with their grandfather, one of which is in her early 20s, another which is just at the tail end of her middle school years, and the other one's like, oh geez, she's only a kid, she's like 3 years old. And the joy that they're able to bring into Ray's life, but his early distance that he tries to create with both himself and this family, considering how he quote-unquote ruined the last family that he was living with, due to circumstances beyond his control, makes him very hesitant into trying to bring himself into their lives. And his stepsister is also very aptly noticing that, and she just decides to burden him and really grind away at any bit of ego and self-confidence that he has left, where it's just, oh, so that's the other family that you moved in. That's the next family that's going to be tragically broken apart by your own misdeeds. And it's just really... It's incredibly tragic and depressing in the first bit, but as Ray is able to open himself up, not only to his new families, but the people around him, it's just an apt, beautiful story about dealing with the effects and the battles of depression, and being able, considering that even though it's helps to get people in your life that aptly help you, give you the strength to try and persevere and taking it one day at a time. But then on top of everything else, you are the one that has to understand yourself, and you are the one that has to bring yourself out of that rut ultimately in the end. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to change. And I'm glad to see Ray change in this case throughout the majority of the series. And it's something that gives me real joy, especially in the second season once we actually see him aptly grow as a person. So huge recommendation to that. So leading on to, possibly the best comedy series on this list would go to Konosuba. So like I said before, a lot of ways that I judge a show on its merits is that if it's, like I said before, if it's a drama, it has to be compelling. If it's a romance, you have to get me invested and emotionally attached to these characters. If it's a comedy, you have to make me fucking laugh. But in this case, Konosuba just does such a good job at not only making me laugh, but also make me care about these piece of shit characters that all essentially find like a home banding together underneath this guild. And it's just like not really tragic, but just laughable at how a lot of these go through, considering that it's in the isekai genre, because this one this dude, late teens, early 20s, I can't remember, essentially gets he gets isekai because he dies trying to save a girl from being run over by a tractor, but the tractor doesn't end up killing him. He ends up having a heart attack, which aptly gets him laughed at by not only the doctors operating on his table, but even his own family members when they come to view his body. And so him, and in this case, this one angel who he brings with him, I guess not angel, a goddess more like it, into this like fantasy RPG style system of a world, and now he has to work himself up from the bottom and like meet another eccentric and colorful cast of characters, and just to try to get on. Like everybody's a piece of shit to each other for the most part, but they aptly grow together as a group, and it becomes like, even with its references and the realization, as well as just the total idea that, yes, this series knows that it's trapped in a isekai, in a fantasy world, like so many other shows that came before it, but it actually recognizes that and brings that into its comedy more than most can. So it was an incredibly fun and entertaining time. I think it was the movie that came out either at the beginning of this year or at the end of 2019, was also an incredibly fun to watch, and it's, just the energy, the comedic timing, and the way the show has been directed and how the characters interact with each other is something that you can only find in this show, and it more than enough deserves my recommendation. So Tamako Market, I said that Hyoka was my favorite Hyoka was the best Kyoto animation work. Tamako Market, as well as its film, Tamako Love Story, is my favorite by far. It is just such an incredibly warm and fuzzy and wholesome series taking place in this little family market where Tamako, who, even though her late mother passed a couple of years back, she runs this mochi shop with her father and has a really good relationship with the boy living across the street that also is the son of a mochi owner. And so everybody inside of this community is just so familial and connected and just generous to each other that everybody is essentially their own extended family. And it's just a cute girls doing cute things show. Like, sure, there is a plot that shows up at the first episode and at the last episode, but when one of the ultimate messages of the show is just like, you don't need to have this grandiose thing. You can still be happy in the world that you are right now, and you can just live through with that, considering that this is where you are happy. And there's nothing wrong with that. This is essentially how you want to live your life. And to be fair, having that opportunity and showing that you can essentially just be happy with what you have now was just such a warm and uplifting message by the end, especially how we get a little bit more of the romance. For better or worse, like, some people don't like how the romance is more accentuated inside the movie, and that it didn't really need to exist. But honestly, the relationship between Tamako and Mochizo is just definitely so warm and so wholesome, and it's just one of my favorite watches by far. But going into a little bit of darker territory, Made in Abyss definitely did its duty in creating like one of the most engaging and mysterious fantasy worlds that could still very well like exist in our own, being based around this abyss that has only been explored so deeply, but only due to the fact that you cannot come back alive, or you cannot come human if you go deep enough, considering that the deeper you go, the harder and harder it is to to get yourself back out of it. But the notoriety, the treasures, the riches, just the legendary status that you are able to get, depending on how deep you dive into this abyss, is more than anything to a lot of people that exist inside of this world. And it definitely is a good... What was it? It does a good job, even though the main characters are children that don't really seem equipped to the job. They've been living inside of this, not monastery, but just living inside of this foster home that trains them in a way that they would be able to survive the depths, considering that our main character, Rico, she's young and naive, but she's competent, which is something that you rarely see. And the only reason that she's even able to live or even navigate the abyss in of itself is when this metal robot boy, Reg, ends up, not really metal, but just robotic, comes out of the abyss and saves her life. But now that she realizes that she has an opportunity to go see and explore the deepest depths into the abyss, now that she knows that possibly her mother is waiting down there for her, it's just an incredibly enticing and rich story that is waiting to be told. I mean, in terms of just the production in of itself, there was a lot of ex-Ghibli people that did a lot of the environmental and terrain design. I think it's Ko Yoshinari, the brother of Trigger director Yo Yoshinari, who does a lot of the monster designs, and he does an incredibly fantastic job at bringing those to life. And the soundtrack by Australian native Kevin Penkin just adds so much to this series that it would just not be the same without. So a huge recommendation. And now we get to the orange section of the list. Studio Orange in this case, and I'm going to start off with Beastars. Even though I know it's from a long-running series that I know is still ongoing, and we've only got 12 episodes, and it's just the very basics at the beginning of the story for the relationships and the events that we know are going to go forward. Dude, it's just so fucking good, and Studio Orange did a really good job bringing these anthropomorphized animals to life. So, I mean, basically the story revolves around this entire... Like, imagine Zootopia, but people call it Zootopia, but horny, because it's the same deal. Anthropomorphized animals are living in a society where carnivores and herbivores coexist, and it follows this high school-based wolf named Legoshi, who ends up just not really falling in love, but just going through the majority of his life trying to figure out what he is and how to battle his own animal instincts, because he's a wolf, in stark contrast to Louise, who is a stag, but he is a herbivore. He is close to the bottom of the food chain, even though his charisma, his enigmatic stature, gives him more presence than most of the animals in the school can, and which is why he's trying to become the Beastar, who is the de facto leader of the society that goes through the majority of this. Man, I'm really running out of juice for my voice here. But it's just... And the white dwarf rabbit Haru, who is in between them, who is she's a rabbit. She's a sex addict, but she's given more than enough characterization as to why she is the way she is inside the society that deems her incredibly weak and small and just more than enough and is only meant to be consumed. It's just the story in of itself. It has a handful of shoujo elements, especially when it comes to the later half of the season, but what it is able to accomplish and how all the characters are able to fight against their own ambitions and their own carnal instincts just does an incredibly exceptional job and is a fantastic bit of storytelling in comparison to The Witch. And then on top of that, the second season is going to be airing at the beginning of 2021, so in a handful of weeks, and you know that I'm going to be immediately jumping on that the first day it comes out. And part 2 of the orange section of this list, Land of the Lustrous, possibly one of my favorites of the decade, if not all of anime. What they were able to accomplish, considering that this was Studio Orange's first solo lead production that they had, and what they were able to accomplish in terms of production-wise, design, molding, modeling a lot of the characters, and like being able to tell the story as well with the inclusion of color, dynamicism, and the music that is also involved inside of the show, is nothing short of just breathtaking and mesmerizing and fucking insane. But essentially, It takes place on this small island somewhere on the Earth with essentially gemstones. Anthropomorphized, very common in Orange's works, anthropomorphized gems. And they essentially live for centuries, and the only thing that they have to fear are the Lunarians, who at random times will essentially teleport through these sunspots in the sky and try to pick up and destroy and drag the gems back to their home on the moon, which is an incredibly out there concept and scenario, but it's just how the story is able to be told and the characters that we end up follow. Phosphoph Light, or just Foss, as she likes to be called, is a relatively young gem, but the trials and tribulations that she has to go through and growing up and becoming more of a character in of itself, rather than just being a lazy, just do nothing that lounges around and waits for the ends of time, considering that she's brittle, she's weak, so she can't go into combat, but then what exactly is she good for if all they're doing is combating the Lunarians for centuries? So she tries to combat that with doing things that only she can do, but also getting lost and just disheveled and broken in the process. It's an incredibly odd show to recommend, but it is without a doubt one of my favorites by far. It is just an incredibly polished and well put together show, and currently reading the manga is close to being concluded. I wouldn't be surprised if it ends by the end of 2021 and we're able to get a few more adaptations out of them through Studio Orange, because they are the only studio I would ever let them give another opportunity to finish all of this up. But it's fantastic. Just go and give it a watch. You're not going to be disappointed. The Eccentric Family. I rewatched the first season of this again because the first ended up coming back way in 2013, and it's just such a fun and energetic just romp of a world that is just so built so closely to ours that you wouldn't be surprised it was right out in front of you to touch and interact with. But it's essentially it just takes place in Kyoto with the introduction of Tanuki, which are creatures who can transform into anything they please, but the majority of the time it's into humans, so they can interact and live inside of their world. And Tanuki, which are essentially humanoid, or sorry, did I say Tanuki? No, Tengu, who just fly through the skies and can, if they don't have wings in their back, they can essentially just levitate and use wind to the forces that not many others can trifle them with. And it's mostly just how a large family tries to interact and survive inside of a world where they previously lost their father, who is a huge upstanding member in the Tanuki community, and how they're able to become their own selves and live outside of the large and glorious shadow that their father was able to emit, and how to become their own person and what they were able to accomplish inside the world and inside the stature and the situations that have befallen them. If season 2 didn't start to teeter off below the end, I definitely would have just immediately put this as one of my favorites of all time. The only knock that I can give season 2 is that it rehashes a lot of story beats from the first season, but other than that, what they were able to accomplish and incorporate inside of their own world through those 2 seasons, if this is all we get, I'm more than happy about it. As my next option is a little bit of a cheat, considering that I know that the first season of Bakemonogatari came out in 2009, but the other 14, 15 or so seasons, adaptations, OVAs, movies, all have come out over the past 10 years, and I will more than enough give that the benefit of the doubt to bring it into it, because it's probably, I don't watch a lot of harems, but I could still quote-unquote call this a harem in the beginning and even stretching out through the majority of its runtime, the best harem show, but that would honestly just be doing this show a disservice. Starting out with it's based off of a set of light novels by Nisio Isin, who is an incredibly apt character writer, and it follows Araragi, who is a vampire, or a Dempire, I guess. It doesn't really use that title as a show, but he's just a vampire, considering that he is still able to go out into the sun, but he is still helping a handful of other people, the majority of them are girls, with their various supernatural tendencies and issues that they have dragging around with them. And that's the basis of it, but even though I called it a harem show, they really fixed that quickly with the with the introduction of Senju Gahara and how their relationship blossoms, and it's probably like my favorite couple inside of anime, like really high up there. So, but it's just the way that the story is progressed. A lot of it focuses on Japanese wordplay, so I can definitely like give mad props to the fan subbers who were able to take those Japanese-esque wordplay jokes and bring them into like a English perspective. But it's just like the characters that they meet along the way, the sequel series or the prequel series that came before it, in the series of movies that came out over the past couple of years, those are fantastic. There's a little bit of a dip depending on like season to season, going back and forth, but it's still just the quality that it's able to accomplish in action, in comedy, in relationships and character writing, and the romance that also blossoms through the majority of this is honestly nothing short of amazing. So there's no doubt in my mind that I would add Monogatari to this list. Let's see. So what to talk about this one with? Shirobako. So this is supposed to be getting a film that was going to come out this year, but everything got moved back, which I kind of got disappointed in. But it is the most anime take of the industry and the production process that you could possibly get. You won't get everything, but it's essentially just following a small studio with the anime that they are producing and creating, and so it's an anime within an anime. And it does a really apt job at characterizing and doing a lot of good job fleshing out a lot of these characters. So sometimes also hitting a little too close for home, because I think it was 5 different girls in 5 different facets of the anime industry, and it's like one of the hardest fucking cuts I've ever seen in anime through the first episode of this was just essentially like all these 5 girls who made their own like animated short film inside of high school, and they're all going to go out and do their best and try to get roles in their respective careers. And it just cuts from one of the girls holding a fucking donut to the sky, and then hard cutting to a fucking steering wheel, and she is dead beat, she is tired, she's got bags under her eyes, and she's just stuck in traffic. And I'm like, oh god, you just can't just throw that on me. It just out of nowhere. It was absolutely. So a lot of it is it's a adult drama based on a lot of these characters like in their early 20s, just trying to like come to terms and trying to find their own place in the world, especially inside of this medium where a lot of the new talent that ends up coming into it just chews them up and spits them out because of how much work and how little pay and recognition that you end up getting inside of this industry. But the passion still shines through inside this series, and what they were able to accomplish inside of the 24 episodes that they were given, with nods to different industry heads and different characters and just retrospective pieces of information and scenarios that actually happened and what the industry has gone through over the past several decades. All of it is brought through in full form in glorious fashion for this show. So if you want to take a little sneak peek inside the anime production process, this would honestly be a really good recommendation. So Run with the Wind. This show made me run a half marathon. That's essentially like all I need to say. Like at the beginning, this anime got me into running a half marathon. The one coming after this will kind of give a better lead in, but at least for the show itself, Run with the Wind takes place inside this university club who is looking for a team of half marathon runners to take part in the Hakone Ekoden, which is basically this half marathon relay with 10 runners that have to run a half marathon each. And it's like this inter-university running competition that takes place at the beginning or end of the year. It's in winter, so it's around those times. And it essentially like follows all these different characters like still in the middle of university trying to figure out what essentially they want to do in life and what running is going to accomplish if all it's going to do is make them sore and make them like dragged and bruised and hurt and takes up a lot of their time, considering that I would imagine a lot of them would want to spend that time a little more wisely than running a half marathon each week. But what the camaraderie that comes through with these characters and the backstories that you're able to get and the characterization and the drama that they still have to go through but accomplish in spite of one another, even though they're all the ones that are able to make this team work and function as a unit. It was just amazing seeing all of these characters in of themselves grow as people, not only due to the help of running in competition that they have to pass in order to even get into this race in the first place, but how they're able to grow as people and what they're able to accomplish once they've all reached the finish line of their own lives and what running will bring in forward with them as well. So, like, on top of the fact that dude, like, in the middle of watching this, I ran a fucking half marathon, which was, like, if an anime can get me into doing this kind of activity, I've got to give it props to that. Which is weird leading into the second last item on this list, Mob Psycho 100. So the only comparison that I can, like, bridge between this and Run with the Wind was that, I mean, Mob Psycho got me into running my first 10K, and I'll get to that in a moment, but I think I guess I might as well start with the synopsis of this, in the sense that it's about this incredibly powerful middle schooler kid named, I think Koyama, I think was his name, but everybody just calls him Mob. He's an incredibly powerful psychic in a world with many psychics, but he's just, like, way up there. But because he's just incredibly introverted and shy, and that all the people inside of his life were thinking of more, like, you want to get a career, like, do well in school, like, do well in sports, like, impress all the girls and just do everything a regular boy wants to do. So even though he is this exponentially powerful psychic, he still wants to be good at things that everybody else that's normal around him can do as well, which is why he looks up to his younger brother, considering that he's cool, he does well in school, like, all the girls like him, and that he's just the exact opposite, but he has no psychic powers. So that's why his relationship between him is a bit strained, and it also comes into essential, like, and then one of the biggest characters inside of the series, who everybody comes to know and love, Reagan, who's just this con artist that makes himself out to be a psychic just so he can get Mob to help him with a couple of small jobs to make money, because he's a little bit of a con artist. But just the emotional depth that this series is able to bring, and how its modems and themes of self-improvement resonate just so well with everybody that ends up giving it a watch. The animation is absolutely stellar, considering that even though the character designs are very simple and just liney, what you are able to do with them in motion more than makes up for the simplicity around their designs. And moving on to this anime was the one that got me into running, because around the second season, around the time that the second season came out, my buddies wanted to get me into running this 10K called the Sun Run out in Vancouver, and it was just like, dude, I haven't ran in over 5 years. In fact, I honestly don't know if I can even run 4K, so why the hell would you even go through that? And so in the second season, Mob trains himself to run in his school's 10-kilometer run, even though he's scrawny, even though he's underdeveloped, shy, anemic to a degree. And it's like, wait, dude, this fucking kid who's pushing himself to improve himself in many different ways, shapes, and forms, just so he can push himself to his own limits and try and become a better person. Fuck, why can't I do that? And it's like, no, dude, you can do that. It's like, you know what? You're fucking right. I can do that. And so I guess, like, through this and Run with the Wind, like, the shows that are able to inspire me to, like, just get out of my shell and do things that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise is, like, definitely earns a plus in my book. And so watching Mob Psycho 100 ended up, like, getting me to run a 10K, and then Run with the Wind ended up making me run a half marathon, and actually, like, just getting me out there and trying to improve myself is honestly just an undeniable plus and a debt that I would never be able to repay. So I definitely would recommend both of these shows from the bottom of my heart. Like, not only do the quality, but what they're able to inspire you to do as well. And so the last show on this list for my favorites of the decade, possibly my favorite of all time, would be Ping Pong the Animation. It's been a while since I think I remember watching this back in 2014, 2015, but just the impact and what it's been able to accomplish, like, as a character drama and a sports drama and a dissection between, like, what it is to compete and what is important to you and when you have to cross the line and when you actually have to go back and think for yourself rather than others. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous. Like, Masaaki Yuasa is probably my favorite director of all time, and this is so far, like, my favorite work of his to date. and what he's able to accomplish inside of these 13 episodes, it looks a little janky at the beginning, and that's why a lot of people kind of wrote it off as at first, and so did I. But it's just like, you would be doing yourself a disservice not giving the show an opportunity. Like, what it's able to accomplish in its short runtime is nothing more than astounding in comparison to all the works that have come out in the past decade. So I guess the basic synopsis, like based around ping pong, is we got Peko and Smile, two high school students that are going through, who are exceptionally good at ping pong, but Smile is just incredibly shy and just self-centered, and like he just doesn't want to cause anybody trouble, and he holds himself back, and he has absolutely no competitive drive, whereas Peko, he's a really good ping pong player, but he's also incredibly overconfident and stubborn, and the fact that he has grown like nowhere near to anybody else that he has seen, considering that he was just a really big fish in a small pond, considering that once he stopped really, putting his all into ping pong and having bigger and badder challengers come through, like one that he ended up looking down upon kicks his ass. A intern student from China ends up completely skunking him in a way that, I think it was 11-0, 21-0. That's the first time it ever happened to his life, and it kind of like sent him into depression, like, wait a second, so what the fuck have I been doing? And what Smile has to do, because his lifelong friend, Peko, is now just off in his own world trying to figure out what he wants to do with his life, and so he's going to have to just deal with everything all on his own time and by himself, and try to figure out what would be the best method to move forward, and in this case, ping pong is the answer to both of them. And so what the show was able to accomplish in its short runtime, and regardless of the style, regardless of what people say about the style of animation, what they're able to accomplish through visual storytelling and how the story plays out in the end is just nothing short of amazing. So I guess that's it, but if I really hope I can get I hope these recommendations will reach anybody who was just sitting around long enough to give this podcast a shot. I think for the foreseen future, I'm going to stretch this out from a 1-week production to a bi-weekly production, because I hate to say it, I'm also too a bit lazy to try and actually get the majority of this stuff going. It was nice to have this kind of experiment to see how much content I would be able to put out in a timely manner, but I think I'll be able to get better topics and better ideas with better time frame that I actually go to myself. So I'm going to see how I'm going to be able to stretch this out into 2021, but I'm hoping that you decide to come along with the ride and join me through wherever this goes. So thanks for listening.